Okay, we will get started. With the Torah portion, we'll start with that. This is one of the most exciting Torah portions of the entire year because it contains within it several vital stories. It opens with what is a difficult verse to understand totally. It's Vayera Adonai be'elonei mamrei v'hu yoshev b'petach oel kachom hayom. Hashem appeared to him, the Lord appeared to him by the terebinths of Mamre. He was sitting at the entrance of the tent as the day grew hot. Just to inform you, one of the things that we have problems with in Hebrew is when you have a pronoun. Well, for example, in English, the convention is if we use a pronoun for God, we capitalize it, right? So here, the Lord appears to him being in the next, we see it's Avraham, and it says he's sitting in the terebinths of Mamre. The rabbinic style was to always associate as much as possible passages in the Torah that are next to each other. So at the end of last week's Torah portion, the end of the previous chapter, we're told about the mitzvah of circumcision, Brit Milah. And so the Midrash understands what is happening here is Avraham is recuperating from his circumcision. And he's sitting by the tent, and the day's growing hot, and the Lord appears to him. Now, there are different ways of reading this verse. A non-Jewish way that I've seen, which I happen to think is a very interesting way, is to read it kind of as a title for what is to follow. It makes a lot of sense, as we'll see in a minute. That what is going to follow tells the story of God visiting Avraham. Okay? But it is taken by the rabbis in the following way. Avraham is on the third day after circumcision. The third day is the worst day after any surgery, they tell you. It's the most painful time. And God is fulfilling the mitzvah of Bikur Cholim, of visiting the sick. Okay? And Avraham, as we'll see, it likes to have guests come to his home. It's pre-COVID circumstances. And God, the Kadosh Baruch Hu, doesn't want Avraham to be worried about people coming by and having to bring him in to visit. So he makes it very hot. That's why he says it's the heat of the day. Because at the heat of the day, people, they're going to find a nice palm tree to sit under and cool off a little bit. So then he sees that Avraham is unhappy because nobody's coming by to visit. And therefore, he brings strangers, these visitors, to see him. These three visitors walking along the way. Because it says, looking up, he saw three men standing near him. And so he runs, and as soon as he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to greet them, bowing to the ground. All right, so God is given in. This is the Midrash. Well, we know clearly what it says. Avraham is sitting in his tent. Avraham sees strangers. Avraham goes to greet them, to bring them into hospitality. Now, the Hebrew says, this is Avraham's statement. Vayomer Adonai imnach matzati chen be'einecha ana ta'avor me'al avadecha. He said, now the word Adonai here is not the name of God. It's not Yud He Vav He. It's the actual word which means Lord. It can mean Mr., like in English. Adon Berman, Mr. Berman. Adoni, my master, Mr. Berman. All right? Normally, when it talks about God, and it uses this noun, Aleph, Daled, Nun, Yud. Under the Nun would be a komatz, an ah vowel, the long form. If it's talking about a secular usage of the term, Mr. So-and-so, it would be a patach. Well, actually, those two vowels we'll talk about later today. Okay, you with me so far? Okay. So, strangely enough, here it uses the kamatz, which would imply he's talking to God. Rashi in his commentary first says he's talking to one of the angels, because he doesn't know who they are yet. He doesn't know they're angels, the messengers. And he's talking to whoever seems to be the most important. And so, my master, sir, come, if it please you, or they translate as my lords, which I don't understand 100% why, but he says, if it pleases you not, go on past your servant, let a little water be brought, bathe your feet, recline under the tree. So Rashi's first interpretation, he's addressing these strangers, inviting them to come in, to have a little visit in his home. Hachnasat orchim, bringing in guests. The second interpretation of Rashi, which follows the voweling, is he's talking to God. He says, God, wait a minute. I know you came to visit me, but there are these strangers who are coming by and they need hospitality. So if it pleases you, don't leave me. Wait a minute while I take care of these guys. The suggestion being Hachnasat Orchim takes precedence over welcoming God. An interesting midrashic turn of phrase. Okay, so anyway, these three strangers come in. Make the long story short, Abraham tells Sarah to make some food for them, and she prepares some food for them, and they say, Abraham, where is your wife Sarah? And he replied, there in the tent. And one said, I will return to you next year, and your wife Sarah will have a son. Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent, which was behind him. Now, Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. Sarah had stopped having the periods of women. All right? He's 99. She's how old is she? 90. All right. So, she's postmenopausal. And it's not normal for postmenopausal women to have children. So she's laughed to herself and said, now that I am withered, am I to have enjoyment with my husband so old? Okay. Then the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I in truth bear a child old as I am? Now, again, the rabbis always read the text very closely. So Sarah said, now that I am withered, am I to have enjoyment with my husband so old? So she says there's three things. I'm old. Am I going to have a child, enjoyment, have sex with my husband? And my husband's an old man. Speaking for old men. Anyway, okay. But what does God say to Abraham? What does God say to Abraham when he quotes it? Why does Sarah laugh, saying, shall I in truth bear a child old as I am? What does he leave out?
He leaves out Abraham's age.
Exactly. He didn't want to bear Sarah and Abraham. So he doesn't, don't cause trouble between a husband and a wife. She called him an old man, but God says, I'll skip that. Okay, again, sometimes they're beautiful lessons. Now, whether or not these are what we call pshat, the literal meaning of the text, or the rabbinic interpretation of the text, whether they're drawing out the meaning or sometimes reading into it the meaning, those are all possibilities. Fancy words, exegesis and eisegesis. Exegesis is you interpreting from what's there. Eisegesis is you're reading into it. Okay, so now you learned a nice big multi-syllabic word for interpretations. So God said, and again, the word that she uses, the titzchak Sarah, again, the root tzadi chuf kuf, chet kuf, tzchak is going to be Yitzchak, Isaac's name. All right? So indeed, God says, don't worry. Yes, this will take place. And that's the end of scene 1. So when they're through with him, with this message, and they depart, and they set out for there going towards Sodom, Abraham walking with them. Now the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Since Abraham has become a great and populous nation, all the nations of the earth will bless themselves by him, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The Lord said, the outrage of Sodom and Gomorrah is so great and their sin is so grave, I will go down to see whether they have acted altogether according to the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will take note. Okay? So this is God on the side saying this. The men went from there to Sodom while Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Okay? So the straight reading again of the text is Avram has started accompanying these men on their journey, and then they left, and Abraham is still standing in front of God. How is that? What does that mean he's still standing in front of God? Well, if we take the original interpretation, he said, God, wait till I finish with the strangers. Who's been standing around waiting? Not Avraham, but God. So it really should read, the text really should read, God was standing before Avraham. God was waiting on Avraham. And indeed, the Talmud says that, and they say what you have here is what they call tikkun sofrim. I'm not going to go into the great details of it, maybe talk about the Bible in general later on, the Tanakh, but it suggests, at least, again, on the simple level, that the sages reworded the text because they didn't think it sounds right to say that God was waiting on Abraham. God forbid. It's the other way around. Abraham was waiting on God. And there's I was just involved with a whole bunch of interpretations on this past week with one of my colleagues. We were discussing it. Okay. So anyway, God's wants to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, Sodom v'Amorah in Hebrew. And he tells Abraham, and Abraham starts arguing with him. When you slay the innocent with the guilty, far be it from God to act that way. And so then they start haggling. If there are 50 righteous men, will you spare this city? He goes, okay. If there's 40, if there's 30, if there's 20, if there's 10, and God, after 10, Abraham stops arguing, God goes off. End of the story. So just keep in mind that Abraham argues with God to save Sodom and Amorah. Part of it perhaps because his nephew Lot lives in Sodom. So the angels go on, they go to Sodom. Now there are only 2 of them. There's interpretations of that. The 2 of them arrive there. Sodom has got a terrible reputation. They reach the city, and where is it? Lot, at least learned from his uncle Abraham to bring guests in. And he goes and greets them, and he says, please, my lords. Now, again, the same wording, my lord, or lords, as they translate it. This time it's with a patach. It means it's secular. He's addressing these men because he doesn't know that they're really angels, which tells you in the biblical mind, an angel has no particular apparition. The word malach that we translate in English as angel really means messenger. So it's very clearly here in many other passages in the Torah and in the entire Tanakh, the Bible, that the malach, the messenger of God, can look like an ordinary human being. No big wings, no fancy halo hanging over their head, no harps and white, well, they may have worn white robes, so did everybody else. Okay. So Lot wants to invite him in. They said, no, we'll stay here in the street. And Lot says, no, come on in. and they come in. And so while they're there, the townspeople, the men of Sodom, gather about the house. They shouted to Lot and said to him, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may be, I'm going to be intimate with them." That's the translation. It says literally, bring them out to us. Now the word to know, just like in English, can have a sexual connotation. Adam knew his wife Eve. It doesn't mean they just met. It means they had sexual relations. And indeed, it tells you something. To be intimate, to really know someone through the act of sexual relations, you're very close, you're intimate with one another. So the understanding is they really want to bring them out and commit rape on these men. Now, Lot wants to protect him, but now what does he do? Which tells you something that happened with his character. So Lot went out to them to the entrance, shut the door behind him, and said, "I beg you, my friends, do not commit such a wrong. Look, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you may do to them as you please, but do not do anything to these men since they've come under the shelter of my roof." Very strange in our eyes. Perhaps in the ancient world, that was considered to be somehow acceptable, that once you brought somebody under your roof, you protected them in any way possible. The rabbis are certainly not pleased with this offer of his daughters to be abused by these men. So they refuse, and these men drag Lot back in, strike the men, youngsters who are outside there with blindness, so they can't find any way, and they go their way. They tell Lot the destruction is about to come. They're going to destroy Sodom and Amorah. Pack up your bags, bring your families, wherever you got, and let's go. They leave, but only Lot's daughters, 2 daughters go with him and his wife. And Lot's, there's just the 4 of them. They're on their way. They tell him not to look back. Famously, Lot's wife looks back and she's turned into a pillar of salt, and, whatever, and then they end up fleeing to the mountains. The daughters of Lot think there's nobody else left in the world. It's just the 3 of them. So they seduce their father so they can have children brought into the world. They get him drunk night 1, and he lies with the older daughter. Drunk night 2, and he lies with the younger daughter. So the rabbi said, maybe he didn't know the first time, but the second time he should have known what was going on. And the results of that relation, those 2 acts, are the Moab and Ammon, historic enemies of Israel. But Moab means from my father or from dad. Ammon means people, my people. And so at least the younger daughter was a little more circumspect in the names that she gave to her children. Okay, so then we'll put them aside now. We go back to Abraham. Abraham and Sarah have another account with Avimelech, the king of the Philistines or Philistia. She's pregnant, she has a child. There's conflict with Hagar and Ishmael. They get thrown out. This is Rosh Hashanah now, the Torah reading. And then comes Akedat Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac. And the story where God says to Abraham that he's going to have to sacrifice his son. And what's interesting and important to note is that, first of all, in the beginning of chapter 22 of Genesis, we're told this is a test. Vayehi ahar hadvarim ha'ele ve'Elohim nisa et Abraham. Came to pass some after these things, sometimes afterward, God tested Abraham. So it's clearly the Torah is telling us this is a test. What is the nature of the test is not clear. The word to test, it can also has related to the word to signify a banner, a nace, which also means a miracle. And here it also is related to the word to test, to try out. And so he says God says, Avram, and Avram says, here I am. Vayomer, and he said, Kachna et bincha yechidcha she'ahavta. Take now your son, your beloved, whom you love, et Yitzchak, Isaac. Lech lecha eretz hamaria, v'aleu sham ola lechadarim asher omar elecha. Take your son Isaac and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there on the altar on one of the mountains that I will point out to you. Okay, so he tells Abraham, here's a Yitzhak, the one who's promised to be his heir, the one who's fulfilled all of his dreams, to sacrifice him on the altar. Now, Rashi in the Midrash, again, read into this a conversation. God says to Avram, take your son. And Avram says to God, I have two sons. I have Isaac and I have Ishmael. Your favorite one. I love both of them. Finally says Isaac. So God kind of draws it out a little bit without shocking him right away. He doesn't say to slaughter him on the altar. He says raise him up on the altar. Normally that means as a burnt offering, but there can be a little bit of ambiguity there. But Avram doesn't seem to catch on that there's ambiguity. And so he gets up early the next morning, maybe because he doesn't want Sarah to know what's going on, takes these guys, they go out. Oh, and what I also wanted to say was, after he tells them, take your son, he uses the same language that he used to tell Abraham to leave his home and go to Canaan. Lech lecha. Exact same words. Lech lecha, the land which I will show you. Here he says, El Eretz HaMoriah, and raise him up there as a sacrifice. Elecha again, the words. So it's echoing the initial story of Abraham going to Canaan. Gets there, make a long story short because we're getting long already. He goes to offer Isaac as a sacrifice. God says no. An angel cries out to him. He stops, and he's not sacrificed. And then right after that account, we're told that Abraham goes back to his use. He had some people who went with him, but only he and Isaac went up to the mountain, right? And offered up the ram. And what is important, and again, ambiguous, after the story, at the end of that story, it says, Abraham then returned to his servants, and they departed together of Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba. Isaac isn't mentioned. There's no mention of Isaac on the way down. There's a brief conversation between Abraham and Isaac when they're going up. Isaac says to Abraham, here's the fire, here is the knife, where is the sacrifice, the lamb for the sacrifice? And Abraham says, my God will show me. Right? That's the last time we hear Abraham and Isaac speak to each other. That's the last time we really see them together. I mean, yes, later on, we know that Abraham looks for a wife for Isaac. At the very end of the Torah portion, we're told about the birth of Rebekah. We'll talk a little bit about next week. But the question remains, did Abraham pass the test? Or maybe he flunked the test? Did he protest? He did for Sodom and Gomorrah. He didn't protest in this case. Was he confident God would keep his word, and that's why he said nothing? Or was he prepared to sacrifice his son because he thought that's what God wanted? Those are mysteries, those are possibilities, and that's what makes it fun. The rabbi says, Shivim panim laTorah. The Torah has 70 faces. You can look at it many different ways, many different interpretations. That's why you have the traditional rabbinic, we call them Mikrot Gedolot. The rabbinic text has the text of the Torah, an Aramaic translation, and many different commentaries who sometimes yell at each other, arguing with each other on what it means. Okay? All right, the Raboisai, as they say in some places. Rabotai, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to look at for Hebrew for now. Okay. And we left off, okay, this is, whoops, yeah, page 9. Okay, I have to share the screen. All right. Tonight's lesson, we're going to start with the letter Tav. It's the middle letter of the word Atah, which is you. We've had Baruch, blessed, praised are you, a source of blessing are you, the letter Tav. Now, the letter Tav is one of several letters in Hebrew. The Bet, the Gimel, the Dal, the Pei, Kaf, Pei, and Tav are all letters that sometimes have a dot in them and sometimes don't have a dot in them. Now, we're going to pronounce them all the time as a T. Okay? One of the differences between the Ashkenazic pronunciation and the Sephardic pronunciation of Hebrew is Sephardim don't make a distinction between these two, but the Ashkenazim say with a dot T, without a dot, they say S. Hence, we have either Shabbat or Shabbos. There's also a change on the accent there. Talis or Tallit. Brachot, brachos. Okay, so that distinction is there. Now, why do you have that? Basically, it is meant, the dot tells you that there is an air stop. Certain letters are pronounced with an air stop or without an air stop. If you say the letter T, you stop the air for a second, right? T, you put your tongue at the top of your palate, right? T. If you don't put your tongue right to your palate, but you let the air flow through it without touching it there, you either get what sounds to some people like an S sound or a TH sound. Modern Bible studies assume that in ancient Hebrew it was a TH. Hence, all of the translations, when you come to the English versions of the Bible, Sabbath, Sukkoth, Shavuoth, because those words all end in the letter Tav without a dot in it. And so, therefore, in Greek, when the Bible was translated from Hebrew into Greek, the Greeks used the letter theta for this letter without a dot in it. I'm sure that's more than you wanted to know, but I like to throw these things in to make it a little more interesting, at least for me, if nobody else. But normally, at the beginning of a word, it will have a dot in it. In the middle or at the end, it depends on grammar, and even at the beginning, it's sometimes affected by the sound that precedes it. We will come across that later on, okay? So let's go down now to line number 1. Okay, so let's unmute ourselves. Okay, and we'll say together, ta,
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 ta, ta,
ta,
tu,
tu,
ta,
ta,
t.
t.
It really would be probably t. but or if it's the end of a word, it'd be no, just the T sound. Okay, so line number 2. We have two,
Two.
tour,
Four.
bot.
But.
Now that's why when I say you're going, if you go to visit a synagogue when a girl's celebrating coming of age, she's going to be celebrating her bat mitzvah, or it's an Ashkenazi pronunciation, her bas mitzvah. That's why brit milah, or bris milah, the same thing. Okay. Next word, toot,
Root.
and root.
Root.
Now, if you pronounce that as a th, you come with Ruth. So Ruth of the Bible. That's Ruth. Ism lamila. Tabur.
Tabur.
Rubat.
Rat.
Betur.
Tour.
Beur.
Or.
At.
Hot.
Okay, Christina's here.
That's really good.
It's okay. Line number 4. We have Bahar,
Bahar.
Tabach,
Tabach.
Turcha,
Turha.
Tarbur.
Tarbur.
Okay, line 5. Tabat,
Tabat.
Batra, Arbat, Tira'u, and Tat. Okay, line 6. Tirahu, Tura, Atur, Aba'u. Too many sounds, huh? And Tifaru. Tifaru. Okay. All right. Now the letter Hey, which is just like the H in English. And obviously it's treated in Hebrew just the way the H is treated in English. It can be, if it follows an ah, or it's above an ah. So it could be ha. Sometimes at the end of the word it'll be ah. Okay? So it's the H as in Haggadah. And like the H, it says it has no sound at the end of the word. Okay? So let's go to line 1. This is the easy one. Ha. Who. Have you learned the rhyme yet? Me is who is he is she, and dog is fish. The word me in Hebrew means who. Who is he? Me who? Who is he? Who is he? He is she. And the word dog means fish. So now you know a whole bunch of words. Okay. Who's on first and on second? Okay.
Abbott and Costello. That was very deep.
All right. Ha. Who?
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 Har. Har. That's mountain.
Harach.
Hara. Ba. See, now you don't have any special extra sound for it. It's ba. No, not ba. If the hey is going to be sounded at the end of the word, because I heard somebody put an H on there. At the end of the word, when it is sounded, there will be a dot in the hey.
Ba.
Ba, not ba.
I'm not saying ba.
Ba.
Ba. Ba, ba, black sheep. Yeah. And the last one is ba. Okay. Number 3, Rabba,
Rabba.
Bihar,
Bahar.
Tur,
Tur.
Turah, Haba. Baruch haba means welcome who's coming. Line number 4. Ba, Hara, Becha, Racha,
Isn't it
Racha. Which one? This was Racha.
Racha?
Yeah. And the last word in that line is Bura. Bura.
Murat.
Line number 5. Tahur.
Tahur.
Turcha.
Turah.
Turcha. Turcha. Habacha. Habacha. Bechura.
Behura.
Ba'a.
Ba'a.
Haba'a.
Ba'a.
Beracha. Beracha. Be blessed. Racha. Beracha. Haberacha. Haberacha. Racha. The blessing. And Bahara. Okay, and he tells me at the bottom here, the word ata means you.
Ata.
Remember, in Hebrew, most of the time, the accent is going to be on the last syllable. Not ata, but ata. Not beracha, but beracha. Not haba'a, haba'a. All right. Well, we will see exceptions when they come. I think we're going to stop there, though. Okay. We will do the rest of that another time. Okay. All righty. The last week we didn't quite get to a couple of things about the Tallit, Tefillin, in Mezzuzah. I'll start with Mezzuzah. Most people, when they hear the word Mezzuzah, they think about these fancy blocks or boxes that we put on the doorposts of our Jewish homes. It's always fascinating to watch a movie where it's some Italian gangster in this nice big fancy house, and if you look on the right-hand door, ways of coming in, there's a mezuzah. They use some Jewish home for the scene. Okay, that is not really the mezuzah. first of all, the word mezuzah is the doorpost. Uchavtam al mezuzot beitecha. It says we will write them upon the doorposts of your home. But by the fact that it was put on the doorpost, it becomes the name of the parchment that we put on the doorpost. And that's the important part. The fancy box that you put it in is totally secondary. You know, you can have it with or without. Let's see, share screen again. This is what the inside of the mezuzah is supposed to look like. All right. And it consists of the first and second paragraphs of the Shema. We're told in the Torah twice, in Deuteronomy, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Hear Israel, Yud Hey Vav Hey, the Lord is our God. The Lord is one. Or alone. V'yahavta et Hashem Elokecha. You shall love the Lord your God. B'chol levavecha, v'chol nafshecha, v'chol me'odecha. You love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. V'hayu advarim ha'ele, and all these words, Asher anochi mitzavcha hayom, which I command you today, al levavcha, will be upon your heart. V'shinantam levanecha, you'll teach them to your children. V'dibarta bam, and you shall speak of them. B'shivtecha b'veitecha, when you sit at home, at your home. U'v'lechtecha v'derech, and when you go out on the way. U'v'shochbecha, when you lie down. U'v'kumecha, and when you rise up. That's why we say the Shema in the morning and the evening. We lie down and we rise up. Ukshartam liot al yadecha, and you shall bind them as a sign upon your hands. Totafot beineinecha, they shall be for a totefet, a symbol, a sign, a bangle between your eyes. Uchtavtam al mezuzot beitecha uvishorecha, and you shall write them on the doorposts of your home and on your gates. And the next paragraph, the V'hayim Shemoah, once again gives both the mitzvah of the mezuzah and of the Tefillin. So we take this literally, not that this is symbolic, but literally that we are to take a scroll. This happens to be a very nice sized one. You can't see it. It's on parchment. This is the inside. That's what you've been reading right there. Okay. Now, normally the way it is, it should be rolled up. It's rolled from this side. You start on this side, going in that direction. The way the word is read. Okay, where he was read from right to left. So when you roll it up the other direction. I don't know why I'm saying right to left. You do it the other way. So the word Shema will be on top. Okay. And when you do that, you will see that on the parchment, on the outside of it, again, you can't see it very well. Let's see. You have the word Shaddai. I don't know if you can see it. Okay. The word Shaddai means Almighty there. And then on the bottom of it, on this part underneath, is a Kabbalistic name of God. I don't know. I don't really remember exactly what stage of history that was added onto the mezuzah. Okay. So when you go to, most people will put it into something. We don't usually just use the parchment on the doors. And matter of fact, what we often do is we put it in paper, in plastic wrap or something to help keep the moisture out so it doesn't ruin it over the course of time. You're supposed to put it, it doesn't say in the front door. It doesn't say in your back door. It says al mezuzot beitecha, on the doorposts, plural, of your home. So really, every doorpost of a home that leads into a room of at least a substantial size, more than a couple inches, excluding bathrooms, But if you have a big walk-in closet, for example, that's included. A storeroom, if it's big enough, that's included. On the right-hand side, as you enter. So if we start with the front door, it's very easy. On your front door, as you're entering into the house, on the right-hand side, next to the door is where the mezuzah goes. Preferably the door normally opens in, and so the mezuzah will be on the doorpost on the outside of the door itself. The door is going to swing in, so the mezuzah will be here. All right. And you will see people follow the custom of kissing the mezuzah. I don't, especially not in this day and age. But some will kiss their finger and then touch the mezuzah, or they touch the mezuzah and kiss it, or just look at it. Okay. Now, every doorway in your home, if you have just one door into it, then there's the right-hand side of the door leading into the room. If you have more than one door, it goes on the right-hand side of the door leading into the more important room. So example, when we go down the hall of my house, there is a door into the kitchen. So it's on the right-hand side of that door leading into the kitchen. But a few feet away, there's another doorway leading into the dining room. Dining room is where you would host important guests, although usually everybody ends up in the kitchen anyway. But you know, the formal room is the dining room. So it's on the right-hand side leading into the dining room. And there's an entryway to my dining room from the hall. And so it's on the right-hand side of the door leading in from the hall into the dining room. So in theory, you'll have mezuzot throughout the house. Any place that you have a room, except for bathrooms and very small closets, are supposed to have a mezuzah on them, because it says, you shall inscribe them on the doorposts of your home and upon your gates. Understood usually as gates of cities. Now it also says that we're supposed to bind them. All right, so if you live in your own, excuse me, go step back. If you live in a place, if you rent a place, after 30 days, you're supposed to put up a mezuzah. If you are in a shared apartment, you share an apartment with somebody who's not Jewish, at least the door to your bedroom, if you have your own separate bedroom, should have a mezuzah on it. Ideally, all the doors should, but at least the door leading to your bedroom. When you leave a house or you leave an apartment, if the people coming in are not going to be Jewish, you don't leave up the mezuzot. If you know they're going to be Jewish, in theory, you're supposed to leave the mezuzot for them. Or you can make a deal with them, whatever the case may be. Okay. In New York, you'll see lots of apartment buildings with the painted over mezuzot on the doorposts. They haven't been checked. They should be checked every few years to make sure they haven't weathered badly. All right. So now,
can I ask a question before we move on?
Sure.
So for the mezuzah, can we just have one? So instead of putting one on every door, can we have just one at the main entrance? Would that be okay as well?
That is at least the minimum requirement.
The minimum, okay.
Is it okay? Well, not completely. To be honest with you, you're supposed to have them on all the doorposts.
Gotcha.
I have a couple of doors where I have some questions about whether I need them there or not. And I have it on my garage door.
Gotcha. So this is within the post. So this is not, this is within the...
Right. You've got a doorpost.
Yeah.
Okay. So the door normally swings in. So the doorpost normally is a little bit to the outside. If there's a space, something, and it also is supposed to be at a slight angle, going inward. Actually, there's a result of an argument. Is it supposed to be straight up, or is it supposed to be straight, horizontal? So a compromise. You put it in the middle. Now, okay. The old story goes that there was a Jewish family that had their house painted, and the painter very carefully took the mezuzot off all the doorposts. And when the family came home, they saw that he had put all the boxes, mezuzot boxes, on the entryway in a nice big basket. And he said, I thought you wanted these, but I took the sales slips and threw them away, i.e. the parchments inside. Okay. Let's talk about the tefillin. So it says, "Ukshartam liot al yadecha v'ayu letatafot beineinecha." You shall inscribe, put them on. You shall bind them on your arms, and you have to put them between your eyes. All right. And in this picture that I have here, this is the tefillin shel rosh, the head tefillin. We'll talk about it in more detail in a minute. But here you see one in the parchments that are in the tefillin, we have the Shema again, also wherever the mitzvah is mentioned in the Torah. So again, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, Chol levavecha v'chol nafshecha v'meyadecha, etc., etc. Ukshartam La'ot al yadecha, and you shall bind them as a sign on your hand. Va'yula totafot bein einecha, and they shall be for a symbol, a bangle between your eyes. Now, the rabbis understood this in a very literal way, and hence we have the mitzvah of the tefillin. Now, the tefillin are leather boxes. What I have here, this is a leather box. I wish I had some better pictures to show you how it's manufactured. If you wanted to go online, you can look and find some information about it. But the picture we have here is of the tefillin shel rosh. That's this one here. And just to show you what we do is we say between your eyes, we don't mean that you wear them down here. Literally between your eyes. It's on the top of the head. Around here, the leather straps are meant to hold it in place. Okay, and it should be right in the middle. Today, we've become very strict on that. And some people you'll see in some synagogues even have little hand mirrors they check and see. They're not checking for their makeup, they're checking for the location of the tefillin. The tefillin shel rosh goes here. The tefillin shel yad, the one for the hand, is placed on the bicep, or the bicep, I think. Okay. It is normally placed here, and you have lots of extra leather strapping. Just quickly. There are variations on how it's done. Talk to your rabbi if they have a particular way. This is a more or less standard Ashkenazic way. And the 7. Many insist on not having a watch on. What happens is now, especially when it comes to the hand, there are different ways of doing it on the hand. This is the more or less the standard Ashkenazi way. It's not the only way. But what happens is when you finish wrapping it, you have 7 times here. You have the tefillin here, going towards your heart. And this looks like the letter Shin, Shaddai, because you have the letter Shin. On the back of the tefillin here, there's a knot that sort of looks like a Dalid. And there's a little knot here that I covered with the band that looks like a Yud, spelling Shaddai, Almighty. Okay. Now, the order of putting them on is first you put on the arm, and then you put on the head tefillin. Those of you who want to learn how to do it, this is not the best way of doing it online like this. You really need somebody around with you to help show you how it's done. The normal way of doing it, the standard way is you put the arm on, but you don't, and you wrap it until you get to the hand. Then you put the head piece on, and then you finish the hand part. Okay. And there are blessings that are recited. You look in the Koran Siddur or any standard Siddur, you'll see the blessings there at the beginning about the tefillin. Now, the difference between the head and the arm tefillin, you can see here, it's hard to make out perhaps, but these aren't just lines. What this is there are actually 4 compartments. This is leather. They use a press to press out the leather to make 4 compartments. And then they squeeze it back together, a little bit of glue to help hold it together. And then on one side of it, you will have the letter shin, the normal letter shin, which is 3 arms. 1, 2, 3. Again, does the light hit it? No. Yeah, you can kind of see it there, right? That's a normal looking shin. The other side has actually got 4 arms. See that there? Again, they take an instrument and they kind of pull it out from the leather. The best ones, the ideal ones, are made of 1 piece of leather. Cheaper ones are made with more than 1 piece of leather. Okay. Then, in each one of these compartments, there are 4 passages. The shel yad, the one that goes on the arm, has all 4 passages on 1 strip of parchment. The one that goes in the head, since there are 4 compartments, you have 4 strips of parchment. 1 goes into each one of the compartments of the parchment. Thus, all right, so the head, this one is with the head, and this is the hand. You saw above what the parchment looks like. Very the same kind of rules and regulations as to writing the Mezzuzah apply to writing the Tefillin. There are other rules that go there. The Hebrew is a little fancier. There's special little decorative devices on it, like here on the shin, on the end there, and on the ayin. The leather hay's got it there as well. Okay. All right. Now, it's important, there's one other item of garb, and that is the Tallit. Now, the last paragraph that we read in the Shema says, you should make tzitzit, fringes, on the corners of your garments. I can get rid of this. Stop sharing. Okay. And indeed, if you have a garment that actually has 4 corners on it or more, you're supposed to put tzitzit on it. Now, most people in today's world, we don't have garments that look like that. So early on, and we find mentioned frequently in the Talmud, the statement is that, excuse me, what is it? Old age getting, all right, I lost, in the Talmud, we often talk about a cloak. the term uses tallit. And in the ancient world, a large squarish garment was your blanket, it was your overcoat, it was your raincoat, it served all kinds of functions. And those normally had four corners. And hence the original design of the tallit was essentially a big square. And Jews maintain the tradition of wearing the tallit at least during prayer. And so the tallit has to have four corners. And on each corner, at the very corner part of it, is where you tie the tzitzit. You will notice that mine actually have the blue fringes. There's a whole new thing today. Originally, it says you're supposed to have one of the fringes should be blue. Ptil techelet. Techelet is a purple bluish dye that was very popular in the ancient world. Purple is related to it. It's very expensive. It was also eventually only used by the Roman emperor. You couldn't wear purple if you weren't the emperor. And the usage of it died out. And so that most talitot today don't have the blue in it. But the last number of years, the reclamation of the process of making this particular dye has come about. And so it's assumed it's a very important opportunity to reinvigorate an ancient mitzvah. There's if you want to go on, look for the Tallit, I'll look it up and send you later on. You can go, there's a whole video on it, on how they do it, making it from these poor little snails. All right. The traditional tallit is, like I said, it's not a shawl that you wear around your neck. Step back. Okay. All right, so this, stepping on. Close quarters here in my corner of the basement. This is a traditional style tallit, normally worn something like this. You have two of the fringes in front, two of the corners in the front, two of the corners in the back, and it covers you. Some follow the tradition of covering the head during prayer. Poke it down. We'll talk about that another time. I do during prayer. Now, you will see people who have more of a square, a shawl-like tallit. Okay, it should not be worn like a scarf around your neck. If you have one like that, and that's what you like to use, and nothing wrong with that, this is obviously not it because it's trying to get it so it works. All right, it should be worn so that it covers your back, not your neck. What constitutes the size of a tallit? The rabbi said a tallit should be big enough that like a 10-year-old child could go out into the marketplace and be covered with it, be clothing for them. Today you'll find them made out of wool, you'll find them made out of rayon, etc. Now, who wears the tallit, and when do we wear the tallit, and when do we wear the tefillin? First, I'll talk about the general rules, and then we'll come back to modern issues. The tallit is worn every morning during the morning prayers. Okay. It is part of the traditional male garb for prayer. And today it's mostly worn only in the morning service. Some, in keeping with the commandment to have it on your garments, wear a rectangular piece of cloth, hole for the head to go for the head, and have tzitzit that they wear all the time. Some have them showing, some have them tucked into their clothes. Some have, some of the Hasidic people will have black stripes across it like the big Tallit does. And that's worn could be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Okay. So the Tallit is worn every day. All right. The only time we don't put on the Tallit in the morning is on Tisha B'Av, when we put it on in the afternoon. The Tefillin are not worn on Shabbat or on a holiday, Jewish holiday. Okay. But again, the tradition has become that it's worn during the morning service. Although there are people today who wear it during the mincha service, and we know from the discussions in the Talmud that there were people who wear the tefillin all day long. And all kinds of stories associated with that. But today, the pretty standard tradition is during the day for the morning service, Sunday through Friday. Not on Shabbat, not on the first 2 days of the holiday or the last 2 days of the holiday. Intermediate days of the holiday, we call Chol Hamoed, they're different customs. Some wear them, some don't. Depends on the synagogue and your rabbi, etc. Okay, now for the Kunz part. Originally, men were the ones who wore Tallit and Tefillin. In recent history, the question has been raised about women wearing the Tallit and the Tefillin. It's not really a new question. It is already discussed in the Talmud, and it's clear that at least in some communities, it seems that the women did wear tzitzit at some point. But clearly during the Middle Ages, up until pre-modernity, only men wore the Tallit and the Tefillin. The Shulchan Aruch, when discussing it, the Ramah, Rabbi Moses Easterless, who gives the Ashkenazic Psak Din, the decision of Jewish law according to Ashkenazic tradition, says that if a woman wants to wear tzitzit, she may do so, but it's kind of haughty on her part. So it's kayahorahi. Now, when it comes to tefillin, he forbids women from wearing tefillin. The reason being, he says, is you have to be very careful about bodily cleanliness. Usually we're talking about passing gas when they talk about in the Talmud that you shouldn't be passing gas when you're wearing the tefillin and other things. And so he says women should not. We do have hints at different periods in Jewish history and various legends and things that talk about some women wearing the Tallit and Tefillin. The story is given that Rashi's daughters wore Tallit and Tefillin. But with the coming of modernity and the issues of modern practice, that's where it became an issue once again. I skipped talking about the head covering. I'll come back to that. I should have said something. And so what we see today is that in non-Orthodox circles, there are various practices. The Reform world mostly gave up on Tallit and Tefillin. And only recently has become more to be found in the Reform movement. And you will find more wearing Tallit today than used to be. Tefillin also has had something of a comeback within Reform. And in the Reform movement, men and women are assumed to do the same thing. The conservative movement has been a little slower in that department. And you will find that in Toronto, most of the conservative synagogues, women don't wear the tallit. At least I don't think they still don't. But that may be changing. Tefillin is even lesser. Again, women do wear them in the conservative movement. Some don't. There are some who wear it sometimes don't. I'm not, the ins and outs of it, I'm not going to go over with you, but it is done and not done. It just depends. Even in the Orthodox world today, you will find some modern Orthodox women who want to pray wearing tallit and tefillin. It's frowned upon by most of the Orthodox world, but it does indeed exist in some circles of what they call open Orthodoxy. Right? Now, when it comes to head covering, as I've always, we know from passages found in the Talmud, that men did not necessarily always cover their head. Indeed, there's a discussion about certain things that one could do or not do in the synagogue bareheaded. Now, the fact that it says you can't do something in the synagogue bareheaded tells you they were in the synagogue bareheaded, right? That's just simple logic. So it's clear that it was not necessarily de rigueur for a man to wear a head covering in the synagogue. And as a matter of fact, in passages that talk about these things, if you want to be extra scrupulous, in your life, or there's stories about giving extra merit to a youngster, making sure he always had his head covered. But that already the language of it suggested that it was something, an extra pietistic act. By the modern age, it became standard practice that men wore coverings over their heads almost all the time. Right? Certainly in the synagogue. Today, one of the things that marked the difference between the conservative movement and the reform movement was conservative synagogues who expected the men to cover their head in the synagogue during worship at least, and wear a tallit during the times that one would wear a tallit. That was one of the dividing lines between the more left-wing conservative and more right-wing reform synagogues. Now, when it comes to women covering their head, now we go to a different issue. It seems that in the ancient world, it was a mark of modesty for a woman to cover her hair. It was just not proper behavior for a woman to go out, at least a married woman, presumably because a woman's hair is, and long hair was certainly a mark of beauty, an issue of how one saw people. Today, there was a time when I was a kid, only people who had long hair were women. I know that's changed a bit, but for many periods, men had long hair too. But women, well, if you're a teenage boy, you maybe spend a lot of time fixing your hair. I know my son did when he was a teenager, and I probably did too when I had hair. But ladies, you seem to spend a little bit more time looking presentable with your hair. Okay, and I know it's a sexist remark, and I apologize, but that's my observation. Guys spend a little bit less time worrying about what their hair looks like. Beard's another story, but that's so it's considered to be modesty. Up in the Middle Ages, non-Jewish women, you look at these pictures of the Middle Ages, the women often had some kind of head covering on. You didn't have to be okay, Adi. But it began to change with modernity, one of these things. And you used to see, even in Orthodox circles in North America, you had a lot of Orthodox women who wore a hat rather than necessarily covering their hair entirely. And some very important Orthodox figures, female figures, wives of important rabbis, there are pictures of them wearing just a hat. Some of you people, okay. I'm the only comedian. I'm supposed to have all the jokes here. All right. When hats began to go out of style for women, some started to wear just sort of a doily, I like to call it, in the synagogue. My mother, of blessed memory, did that. And then it became a sign of marked orthodoxy that the women covered their hair more. Today, you really have a variety of practices. Still, in very pietistic circles, certain Hasidic circles, a married woman shaves her head and only wears a wig or something like that. It's not quite as prevalent. You do have a lot of Orthodox women who never show their own hair. They may wear a wig. They may have their hair in some kind of covering that you cannot see their hair at all. Then you have a practice of women who may wear a hat all the time. My wife now always wears a hat in public. My daughters-in-law either wear a complete covering or only wear a wig when they go out in public. Then in the conservative world, a lot of women have adopted the practice of wearing a kippah, just like the men do. Kippah, yarmulke in the synagogue. Some do it all the time. Some have it a little more feminized kind of kippah that they wear. And in the Reform world, still you have some who don't wear a head covering at all and insist that you take off your hat if you walk into the synagogue. So you have all of these different practices in terms of that. Okay. Really haven't gotten to Kashrut, which is supposed to be the main subject for tonight, but as you see, things sometimes go longer and shorter than other times. So I'm just going to start with a brief introduction for Kashrut, and we'll spend a lot of time on it next week, and I'll cut short some of the other things. Let's begin with a very basic principle. Keeping kosher has nothing to do with cleanliness. It has nothing to do with health. It is a modern attempt to try and explain kosher laws as having to do with health. But there's not only moderns. Even Maimonides suggests that the kosher diet is healthier for people. I'm not sure that's necessarily the case. But what Kashrut is really about, the concept of it, is to make sure that everything that we do in our life can be a means of worshiping God and distinguishing us as a people. One of the things I like to use is that everything that we as human beings do, pretty much we share with animals. Animals need to eat. Animals need shelter. Some animals grow their own clothing so that they, to keep warm. Some animals cooperate in hunting. Some animals pirate off of each other and kill each other. Right? We find that all in human life. We eat. We need shelter. We reproduce. We have property. We fight over things. But the difference is we can make decisions about all of those activities that animals cannot. We can make our home a special place putting on a mezuzah, having Jewish books in our home, and Jewish art in our home, making it not simply for walls, but a Jewish home. We can eat, or we can say, yeah, I eat, but I limit what I eat. I limit how I eat. I pray and thank God before I consume food. I thank God after I consume food. And even the food that I eat becomes a recognition that I'm trying to be part of an Am Kadosh, a holy people. And yet it also separates, and there's no question about it, the Jew from the Gentile. One of the important things of relationships, as we all know, is to share a meal, to eat together. And if you have restrictions on what you're going to eat, that is going to put a certain kind of natural boundary up. So it does become a way of separating. And the Reform movement, when they began, they wanted to eliminate this kind of separation. And Dean still insists upon that in certain quarters. And Kashrut, keeping kosher, does create a boundary. And there are a number of Jewish laws that are meant to set boundaries so that we can remain an identifiable people, a distinct people, even while we may share with others around us in many other ways. So that's what Kashrut is about. It begins with the laws in the Torah. The Torah gives us certain rules and regulations about what we can eat. First of all, makes very clear, if it lives on land, it has to have a cloven hoof, a split hoof, and it must chew its cud. So first of all, we know it's going to be a herbivore. If you are what you eat, we only eat animals that don't eat other animals, or at least large animals don't. Split hoof means there's not going to be claws. It's actually toes, right? So, that's a couple of toes that got put together, at least according to evolutionists, right? So dairy cattle, we think of cattle. Those are all chew their cud. Chewing your cud is because they eat grass. In order to digest grass, it has to be broken down. The cellulose requires a lot of work. So the animal chews it, it swallows it, it begins a process of digestion. After it goes through the first stomach or two, then it comes back up, it chews it some more and goes down to another stomach. And that way it can be digested. Okay. The normal, when we think of the kosher animals that are around that we consume, cattle, bison, we can, buffalo, American buffalo, goats, sheep, all those are examples of kosher animals. Examples of non-kosher animals, well, the most famous one is the pig. Everybody knows the pig's not kosher. Now, if you look at a pig, pigs usually, they lie down with their feet in front, and it says, the joke is the pig's pretending he's kosher because he's got his cloven hoof in front, okay? But they don't chew cud. So the pig, therefore, is a clear example of a non-kosher animal. An example of another non-kosher animal is a horse. And while it chews its cud, it doesn't have a cloven hoof. Similarly with a camel. So those are the major beef animals that we think of. You have cattle, bison, most kinds of deer are actually technically kosher. The moose is technically kosher. I think elk are kosher. Not that I've had any of those. I have had bison. Bison. Cud, you spelled it correctly, Adi. C-U-D. We're not farmers anymore, so we don't know all these things. So if it lives in water, if the creature is a water creature, it must have fins and scales. So if it lacks one of those two, it is not a kosher fish. Now, that means all sea mammals are not kosher. All crustaceans, crabs, shrimp, all those lobsters, all those good things. I didn't keep kosher as a youngster. My family didn't keep kosher until I was much older. And I ate once and only a lobster just before I started keeping kosher. So I do remember what it tasted like. No, I don't. I remember having it. By the way, the rabbis say you should not say you don't eat something because you don't like it. You don't eat it because the Torah says you can't. And what can I do? Whether I like it or not, that's what the Torah says. Okay, so if it lives in water, fins and scales. Well, trout, walleye, northerns, most tuna are examples of fish that have fins and scales. We ruled out the sea mammals. We ruled out the crustaceans. Eels are not kosher. Catfish are not kosher. Common examples of non-kosher fish. There are many, many different fish. The major commercial fish are kosher fish. Now, the Torah does not really describe what kinds of fowl, F-O-W-L, birds, can be eaten. All it does is it gives us a list of birds that cannot be eaten. The problem with that is we can't really necessarily identify all of those birds. So pretty much what has become the traditional approach to eating of fowl, F-O-W-L, is if it was normally eaten by the communities, the long traditions of eating them. Chickens, domestic ducks, domestic geese are examples of kosher birds. Pigeons, not that we eat pigeons too much anymore. Pheasant are all examples of kosher birds. The examples that are clearly not kosher birds are clearly the raptors, eagles, and hawks. And the rabbis try to come up with definitions of how you distinguish them. It's not so simple. But in essentially, either the birds were identified as similar to other birds that were eaten, or they were known to be eaten. There was a big argument over turkey, because turkey comes from North America. And the last time we looked, there was not an old standing Jewish community that had been eating turkey for hundreds and hundreds of years. So there are some Jews who won't eat turkey. Others say it's just like chicken, and so turkey is accepted. Theoretically, there are some kosher grasshoppers. I have no way of identifying them. I have books that suggest ways of identifying them. Yemenite Jews used to eat them. As far as I know, nobody else eats them. And so as far as we're concerned, forget about eating grasshoppers. Rabbits do not have a cloven hoof, and rabbits don't chew their cud, but they look like they chew their cud. So the Torah says it even though it chews its cud, it's not kosher, but we know they don't really chew their cud. They're also very cute. They look, who wants to eat a rabbit? And we've got all these pet squirrels running around our backyard now. Ever since this summer, we put up bird feeders, and my wife has to go out and give peanuts to the local squirrels. They come to the door and they knock in the morning. How come you haven't come out with our peanuts yet? We have a whole zoo in the backyard now. Anyway, fortunately, the skunks aren't around anymore. So we have a limitation of birds. We have a limitation of fish. We have a limitation of beef, cattle, etc. There are very stringent rules, and we'll talk more about it next week, about slaughtering, proper slaughtering of an animal, removing blood from the animal, and the eating, separation of dairy and meat products. We'll get in all of that next week and what we do in case we make a mistake and you know, you mix your meat with your milk and all those things. So are there any questions that anybody has they want to ask what we've talked about tonight?
Yes, I have a question about kashrut.
Yeah.
What are the accepted waiting times between meat and dairy?
Yes.
Is it 6, 4, 3 hours?
The answer to that is an unadulterated yes. The Talmud, when it discusses it, merely says between meals. You're not supposed to have a dairy meal right after a meat meal, but what's the time frame? It doesn't really say. Different customs developed. The dominant Eastern European and Sephardic tradition is after consuming meat to wait 6 full hours before consuming dairy. Some wait 5 hours, and as long as you're into the 6th hour, they will then eat dairy. Some, following the pattern that was prevalent in Germany, wait 3 hours. 3 full hours. That's what I do. That's what, when we started keeping kosher, and that was a practice at Camp Ramah, and so that's what developed in ours. There were Dutch Jews who were said to wait 72 minutes because they would have meals more frequently or small meals, what have you. That was their practice. Between eating dairy and eating meat, most opinions are as long as you have a clean mouth, you can consume meat afterwards. The only issue is if you're eating very hard cheese, which we really don't have much around here these days, really hard cheese, because then you have the same issue that you have with eating meat, because you have particles that may be caught in your teeth or what have you, and don't get out completely. And Sephardic Jews tend to wait, at least some of them, the 6 hours after dairy before eating meat. Most Ashkenazim, just a matter of minutes. You know, wash your mouth out, eat a piece of bread, and go and eat. When we talk about the holiday of Shavuot, that is a very prevalent custom. Shavuot, when we talk about more in the spring, the custom is to eat dairy products on the holiday of Shavuot. And some follow of having dairy meals, which is what I do, my family does. However, my son, who's a real meat eater, my oldest son, doesn't like that. So he has dairy, something dairy, clears the table off, and brings out the meat. You know, he has a drink of water, or even better, a drink of schnapps between. And he's the one, well, the dark beard. My beard was as long as his until I chopped it off the other day. But in very, very Orthodox circles, that's what they will do. They will have something dairy, and just a few moments later, have meat. Okay. So again, as I try to, as I say, speak to your rabbi as to their guidance. Mostly, I think in the conservative world, there's a strong tendency to do the 3 hours. Some do the 6, you know, and you talk to them, to your rabbi, what they advise. One thing nice about 3 hours, you know, you have little kids, you eat dinner at 6, and if they're getting a little bit older, by 6:30 you're through with dinner, so 9:30 you can have your ice cream before you go to bed, because you had your 3-hour break in between. When you're talking about infants and all that, it's a whole different story. Don't worry about that. Okay. Anything else
Thank
right
you.
now? You're welcome. Okay. All righty. It was nice having everybody here with us today. I'm going to go back to fetching and sitting on shpilkas. Ever hear the term shpilkas? Sitting on needles, waiting to find out who's the next president of the United States. All right. Okay, everybody. Have a good night. Be well. And
Good night.
teach everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, Rob.